Sarah Martinez had dreamed of this day since she was a little girl. The church was decorated with white roses and golden ribbons exactly how she had imagined. Her wedding dress sparkled under the soft lights and her heart raced with excitement. After 3 years of dating, she was finally marrying David Thompson, the man she thought was perfect for her. But Sarah wasn't the only one excited about this special day. Her 8-year-old daughter Emma was bouncing around in her pink flower girl dress, practicing her walk down the aisle for the 100th time that morning. Emma's father had left when she was just 2 years old, and Sarah had raised her alone until David came into their lives 2 years ago. David had seemed like a blessing at first. He was charming, successful in his business, and always brought gifts for Emma. He would take them both out for ice cream and tell Sarah how much he loved having a ready-made family. Sarah's mother, Gloria, had some doubts about David, but Sarah was so happy that she ignored the warning signs. The ceremony began perfectly. Sarah walked down the aisle, her eyes locked on David's smiling face. The priest spoke about love, commitment, and family. Emma stood beside them, holding the rings with pride. Everything seemed magical until the moment came for the traditional family unity candle lighting. Emma, excited to be part of the ceremony, accidentally knocked over a small vase of flowers while reaching for the lighter. The water spilled onto David's expensive shoes, and in that instant his face changed completely. The charming smile disappeared, replaced by a look of pure anger that Sarah had never seen before. Without warning, David raised his hand and slapped Emma across the face. The sound echoed through the silent church like a gunshot. Emma stumbled backward, tears immediately filling her eyes as she held her reddening cheek. The entire congregation gasped in shock. Sarah stood frozen, unable to believe what had just happened. The church fell completely silent except for Emma's quiet sobbing. David straightened his tie and looked around at the shocked faces staring at him. He seemed annoyed by their reactions, as if hitting a child at his own wedding was perfectly normal behavior. Sarah's mind raced as she looked between her crying daughter and the man she was supposed to marry. In that moment, she realized that her mother's concerns had been right all along. This wasn't the man she thought she knew. The David standing before her was someone entirely different, someone dangerous. Emma ran to her grandmother Gloria, who immediately wrapped her arms around the sobbing child. Gloria's eyes blazed with fury as she glared at David. The other wedding guests began whispering among themselves, some standing up from their seats in outrage. Sarah finally found her voice. Her hands shaking, she looked directly at David and said the words that would change everything. The fairy tale wedding she had planned was about to become something completely different. What happened next would shock everyone in that church and teach David a lesson he would never forget. The priest stood speechless, his prayer book trembling in his hands. The photographer had stopped taking pictures, and the wedding videographer wasn't sure whether to keep recording. Everyone waited to see what Sarah would do next, not knowing that this moment would become the talk of their small town for years to come. Sarah looked at David with eyes full of disappointment and anger. Her voice was steady but cold when she spoke. "David Thompson, I cannot and will not marry a man who would hit my daughter. This wedding is over." She pulled off her engagement ring and threw it at his feet. The ring bounced across the church floor with a metallic clink that seemed louder than thunder in the shocked silence. David's face turned red with embarrassment and rage. He had never been rejected like this, especially not in front of so many people. "You're making a huge mistake, Sarah," he hissed through clenched teeth. "You'll never find anyone better than me. You're just a single mother with baggage. I was doing you a favor by marrying you." His cruel words only made Sarah more determined. She walked over to Emma, who was still crying in Gloria's arms, and gently touched her daughter's swollen cheek. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered. "Mommy should have protected you better." Emma looked up at her mother with trust and love, despite the pain she was feeling. Gloria stood up, still holding Emma, and faced David with fire in her eyes. "You are a coward and a bully," she said in a voice that carried throughout the entire church. "Only a weak man hits a child. You don't deserve my daughter or my granddaughter." The wedding guests were now talking loudly among themselves. Some were recording everything with their phones, while others were calling their friends and family to tell them what was happening. David's own family members looked ashamed and embarrassed. His mother covered her face with her hands, and his father shook his head in disbelief. Sarah's maid of honor, her best friend Jessica, quickly gathered the bridal party around Sarah for support. "We're all here for you," Jessica whispered. "You did the right thing." The other bridesmaids nodded in agreement, forming a protective circle around Sarah and Emma. David realized that everyone in the church was against him. He tried to save face by acting like the victim. "Fine," he shouted. "Keep your bratty, kid. I don't need this drama in my life anyway. There are plenty of other women who would be grateful to have me." But Sarah wasn't done. She had something else planned that would make sure David never forgot this day. She walked to the front of the church and picked up the microphone that the priest had been using for the ceremony. Her hands were no longer shaking and her voice was strong and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah announced to the entire congregation, "thank you all for coming today to witness what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, you've all seen the true character of the man I almost married. David Thompson just showed all of you exactly who he really is by hitting my 8-year-old daughter at our wedding altar." The crowd murmured in agreement. Many people were nodding their heads and some were even clapping. Sarah continued, "I want everyone here to know that no woman or child should ever accept abuse from anyone, no matter how much they claim to love you. Today, my daughter and I choose respect and safety over a marriage built on lies." David tried to interrupt her, but the crowd was having none of it. Several of the male wedding guests, including Sarah's brother Mike and her cousin Tony, stood up and formed a barrier between David and the microphone. They didn't say anything, but their message was clear. David needed to leave immediately. The priest, who had been silent during this whole ordeal, finally stepped forward. "I think it's best if you leave now, young man," he said firmly to David. "This is a house of God, and your behavior has been completely unacceptable." David looked around at all the angry faces staring at him. He realized he had lost completely. His reputation in the town was ruined, and there was no way to fix this situation. But what he didn't know was that Sarah had one more surprise waiting for him, something that would make his humiliation complete. As David started walking toward the church exit, his face burning with shame, Sarah wasn't finished with her announcement. She still held the microphone and her voice carried clearly through the stunned silence. "There's something else everyone should know about David Thompson before he leaves here today." David froze in his tracks, a look of panic crossing his face. He turned around slowly, wondering what else Sarah could possibly say. The wedding guests leaned forward in their seats, curious about what other secrets were about to be revealed. Sarah took a deep breath and continued. 3 weeks ago, I discovered that David has been stealing money from his business partner's company. I found the bank statements and receipts hidden in his closet when I was packing to move in with him. He's been taking thousands of dollars and covering it up with fake invoices. The gasp that went through the church was even louder than when David had hit Emma. David's face went from red to completely white. His business partner, Robert Chen, was sitting in the 3rd row with his wife. Robert stood up immediately, his face full of shock and anger. "Is this true, David?" Robert demanded loudly. "Have you been stealing from our company?" Robert had trusted David completely. They had been friends since college and had built their construction business together over the past 5 years. The thought that his best friend and business partner would steal from him was devastating. David tried to deny it, but Sarah was ready for this. She had brought copies of the evidence with her, hidden in her bridal purse. Jessica quickly retrieved the purse and handed Sarah a folder full of documents. Sarah held up the papers for everyone to see. "I have bank statements showing David deposited company checks into his personal account," Sarah announced. "I also have receipts for expensive jewelry, vacations, and cars that he bought with stolen money. Robert, I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I couldn't let you continue working with someone who was robbing you blind." Robert's wife gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Robert himself looked like he had been punched in the stomach. "David, we trusted you with everything," Robert said, his voice breaking with emotion. "My family trusted you. How could you do this to us?" David realized his entire life was falling apart in front of everyone. Not only had he lost Sarah and humiliated himself by hitting Emma, but now his business career was destroyed too. He tried to make excuses, but no one was listening anymore. "I was going to pay it back," David stammered weakly. "It was just temporary. I needed the money for the wedding and the honeymoon. I was going to replace it all after we got married." But his excuses only made things worse. Sarah shook her head sadly. "David, you spent over $50,000 of Robert's money on gambling debts. I found the betting receipts too. You weren't planning our future. You were destroying everyone who trusted you. The revelation about gambling made the situation even more serious. Several people in the congregation knew about David's frequent trips to the casino, but they had no idea he was using stolen money to fund his addiction. His own family members looked mortified. Robert was now standing in the aisle, his hands clenched into fists. "David, I'm calling the police right now," he said, pulling out his cell phone. "You're going to jail for this. I trusted you with my life savings, my children's college fund, everything." David panicked when he heard the word police. He started backing toward the exit more quickly, but Sarah's brother Mike and cousin Tony moved to block his path. They weren't going to let him escape before facing the consequences of his actions. The church erupted into chaos as people started talking loudly, some calling their own friends and family to spread the news, others comforting Robert and his family. The wedding that was supposed to be a celebration had turned into a public exposure of fraud and abuse. But Sarah still had one more surprise that would ensure David faced full justice for everything he had done. She looked at Emma, who had stopped crying and was now watching everything with wide, curious eyes. Sarah knew she was teaching her daughter an important lesson about standing up to bullies and protecting the people you love. As Robert dialed the police on his phone, Sarah held up her hand to get everyone's attention once more. "Before the police arrive," she said into the microphone, "I want everyone to know that I already contacted them yesterday. Detective Martinez has been waiting outside in an unmarked car for the past hour." David's eyes widened in terror. He spun around toward the church doors, and sure enough, he could see through the glass windows that several police officers were now walking up the front steps. Detective Martinez, who happened to be Sarah's older brother Carlos, entered the church with two other officers. "David Thompson," Detective Martinez called out in his official police voice, "you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and theft. You have the right to remain silent." The detective's voice echoed through the church as he approached David with handcuffs ready. David tried to run toward the side exit of the church, but Sarah's male relatives were ready for him. Her cousin Tony, who played football in college, easily tackled David to the ground near the altar. David's expensive wedding suit got torn and dirty as he struggled helplessly on the church floor. The wedding guests were now standing and watching in amazement as the police officers took control of the situation. Many people were taking pictures and videos with their phones, knowing this would be the most incredible story they would ever have to tell. Detective Martinez helped David to his feet and put the handcuffs on him. "Sarah gave us all the evidence we needed," he explained to the crowd. "We've been investigating Mr. Thompson's financial crimes for 2 weeks. We were planning to arrest him on Monday, but Sarah suggested we wait until after he revealed his true character publicly." David looked at Sarah with pure hatred in his eyes. "You planned all of this," he accused her angrily. "You set me up." "This whole wedding was a trap." Sarah nodded calmly. "You're absolutely right, David. When I found out you were a thief and a liar, I decided you needed to face consequences in front of everyone who believed in you. But I never planned for you to hit my daughter. That was all you, showing everyone exactly who you really are." Robert Chen walked up to David, still in shock but getting angrier by the minute. $50,000, David. That was my children's future you stole. My daughter's college fund, my son's medical bills. How could you sleep at night knowing you were destroying my family?" David couldn't look Robert in the eyes. He mumbled something about being sorry, but no one believed his apologies anymore. The damage was done, and everyone could see that he was only sorry because he got caught. Emma, who had been quietly watching everything from her grandmother's arms, suddenly spoke up in her clear 8-year-old voice. "Mommy, is the bad man going to jail now?" Her innocent question made several people in the church start crying, thinking about how this little girl had been hit by someone who was supposed to protect her. Sarah walked over and took Emma from Gloria's arms. "Yes, sweetheart," she said gently. "The bad man is going to jail and he can never hurt you or anyone else again. Mommy made sure of that." Detective Martinez began leading David toward the exit, but David had one more outburst of anger and desperation. "You'll regret this, Sarah," he shouted over his shoulder. "I'll make sure you pay for ruining my life." His threat only made the police officers grip his arms more tightly. "Making threats in front of witnesses isn't very smart, Mr. Thompson," Detective Martinez said coolly. "That's another charge we can add to your list." As David was escorted out of the church in handcuffs, the wedding guests began to applaud. They were cheering for Sarah's courage in standing up to a dangerous man and protecting her daughter. The applause grew louder and louder until the entire church was filled with the sound of people celebrating justice. But the most surprising part of this incredible day was still to come. Sarah had one final announcement that would turn this disaster into something beautiful, showing everyone that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the most wonderful surprises. After David was taken away in the police car, the church fell into an unusual quiet. The wedding guests didn't know what to do next. Some started gathering their purses and jackets, thinking the event was over, but Sarah was still standing at the altar with the microphone in her hand. "Please, everyone don't leave yet," Sarah announced, her voice now much happier than it had been minutes earlier. "I know this has been the strangest wedding anyone has ever attended, but I have one more surprise. This day isn't over." The guests looked at each other curiously and settled back into their seats. Emma was now smiling again, her cheeks still red but her tears completely dry. She seemed to understand that something good was about to happen. Sarah looked toward the back of the church and nodded to someone near the entrance. The church doors opened and in walked a man that made several people gasp with pleasant surprise. It was Marcus Johnson, Sarah's childhood friend who had been secretly in love with her for years. Marcus was wearing a simple but elegant navy blue suit, and he was carrying a small bouquet of Emma's favorite purple flowers. He walked slowly down the aisle, his eyes locked on Sarah's face, which was now glowing with genuine happiness for the first time that day. "Marcus?" Robert Chen said out loud, recognizing him immediately. Marcus worked as the head accountant at Robert's construction company and had actually been the one to help discover David's theft. "What are you doing here?" Marcus reached the altar and took Sarah's hands in his. "I've been in love with you since we were teenagers, Sarah," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "When you told me about David's crimes and asked for my help gathering evidence, I realized I couldn't stay silent about my feelings anymore. Life is too short to waste time with the wrong people." Sarah's eyes filled with happy tears. "Marcus, you've been my best friend through everything. You helped me see David's true character when I was too blind to see it myself. You've been more of a father to Emma in 2 weeks than David was in 2 years. Emma wiggled out of Gloria's arms and ran to Marcus, wrapping her small arms around his legs. "Marcus, did you come to marry Mommy instead?" she asked with the innocent directness that only children possess. The entire church erupted in laughter and awes at Emma's sweet question. Marcus picked her up and held her gently, being careful not to touch her bruised cheek. "Only if your mommy wants to marry me, little princess," he said softly. "And only if you give us your permission." Emma looked seriously at her mother, then at Marcus, then back at her mother. "Marcus never yells at me," she announced to everyone. "And he always brings me books and helps with my homework. And he makes you smile, Mommy. The real kind of smile, not the pretend one you used with the bad man." Sarah was crying happy tears now. The priest, who had been standing silently through all the chaos, stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Well," he said with a chuckle, "this is certainly the most unusual wedding day I've ever experienced. But if two people want to get married in the house of God and they truly love each other, who am I to say no?" Marcus got down on one knee right there at the altar, still holding Emma in one arm. He pulled a simple, beautiful ring from his pocket. Nothing fancy or expensive like David's flashy ring, but something chosen with love and care. "Sarah Martinez," Marcus said, his voice strong and sincere. "Will you marry me? I promise to love you and Emma with all my heart, to protect you both and to never raise my voice or my hand in anger. I want to build a real family with you, based on trust, respect, and genuine love." The church held its breath waiting for Sarah's answer. This was the proposal she had dreamed of her whole life, not planned or staged, but spontaneous and real, coming from someone who truly knew and loved her. Sarah looked around at all the faces watching her, her family, her friends, Robert and his wife, and all the wedding guests who had witnessed the most dramatic morning of their lives. Then she looked back at Marcus, the man who had been quietly supporting her and Emma for months without asking for anything in return. Her answer would surprise everyone once again, and create a wedding story that their small town would talk about for decades to come. Sarah looked into Marcus's honest, loving eyes and felt her heart fill with a warmth she had never experienced before. This was what real love felt like, safe, genuine, and built on friendship and respect. "Yes, Marcus Johnson," she said with the biggest smile of her life, "I will marry you." The church erupted into cheers and applause that were even louder than before. This time people were celebrating true love instead of justice. Emma clapped her hands excitedly and gave Marcus a big kiss on his cheek. "Now you can be my real daddy," she announced, making everyone laugh and cry happy tears at the same time. The priest beamed with joy. "Well then, let's have ourselves a proper wedding," he declared. "Marcus, do you have a best man?" Marcus looked around the church and pointed to Robert Chen, who had become his close friend over the past year. "Robert, would you do me the honor?" Robert, still emotional from discovering David's betrayal but now smiling through his tears, nodded enthusiastically. "It would be my privilege," he said, walking up to stand beside Marcus. "After everything that's happened today, I need to be part of something beautiful." Sarah's maid of honor, Jessica, was already at her side, having stayed close throughout the entire ordeal. The other bridesmaids quickly fixed Sarah's hair and dress, which had gotten slightly messed up during all the excitement. Emma stood proudly beside her mother, still wearing her pink flower girl dress. The photographer, who had stopped recording during the chaos with David, started taking pictures again. But this time every photo captured genuine smiles and real happiness. The wedding videographer resumed filming, knowing this footage would become a treasured family memory. As the ceremony began, the atmosphere in the church was completely different from an hour earlier. There was no tension, no fake smiles, no hidden secrets, just pure joy and celebration of two people who truly belonged together. Marcus's vows were simple but heartfelt. "Sarah, you and Emma have made my life complete. I promise to be the man you both deserve, honest, faithful, and devoted to our family. I will love you in good times and protect you in difficult times. Emma, I promise to be the father you've always deserved, to support your dreams and to never let anyone hurt you again." Sarah's vows brought tears to everyone's eyes. "Marcus, you showed me what real love looks like. You loved me when I couldn't see clearly, supported me when I was making mistakes, and helped me find the courage to protect my daughter. You've been our guardian angel, and now you'll be my husband and Emma's father. I promise to love you with the same kindness and devotion you've shown us." When the priest asked if anyone objected to this marriage, the entire church shouted, "No!" in unison, then burst into laughter. Everyone wanted this wedding to succeed after witnessing the disaster that had been prevented earlier. Emma was given the honor of presenting the rings. Marcus had called his sister that morning and borrowed her wedding ring for Sarah, while Sarah took off her grandmother's ring and gave it to Marcus. They weren't expensive rings, but they were filled with family love and history. When the priest finally said, "You may kiss the bride," Marcus and Sarah shared the most genuine, loving kiss any of the wedding guests had ever seen. Emma jumped up and down, clapping her hands and shouting, "Yay!" The entire church stood and applauded, many people crying happy tears. As the new family walked back down the aisle together, the church bells began ringing, signaling to the whole town that something wonderful had happened. The wedding reception, which had been paid for and prepared for David's wedding, became a celebration of Marcus and Sarah's surprise marriage. During the reception, Robert Chen stood up to make a toast. "I lost a dishonest business partner today, but I gained a brother-in-law in the most incredible wedding story of all time. Here's to Sarah's courage, Marcus's patience, and Emma's resilience. And here's to the fact that sometimes the worst days can turn into the best days of our lives." 6 months later, David was sentenced to 3 years in prison for embezzlement and fraud. Sarah, Marcus, and Emma had moved into a cozy house with a big backyard where Emma could play safely. Marcus officially adopted Emma, and she proudly changed her last name to Johnson. The whole town still talks about the wedding day when a bride exposed a criminal, protected her daughter, and married her true love all in the same morning. Sarah kept her wedding dress, not because she wore it to marry David, but because she wore it when she married Marcus, the man who showed her what real love and family truly mean.